Now I know it does seem like it is review season at the moment, particularly with the amount of products that we're taking a look at, but it isn't. It is just a coincidence. And today we're taking a look at another one, but this time it is an all-in-one cooler from our friends at Gelid. They actually recently sent us an air cooler, which actually inspired me to want to use more going forward. And today I want to see if all their all-in-one coolers are just as good. So for those of you that watch the channel regularly, you'll know that when I do a build, I tend to actually gravitate towards an all-in-one cooler. I'm not a big fan of the air coolers. I don't know why. I don't think they look as good. I think the all-in-one cooler is kind of that real combination of your custom loop and your fan systems. So I'm always on the lookout for a decent one. This one was actually sent to us by our friends at Gelid, who wanted us to take a look at it and see how well it performed against the recent air cooler that we looked at. And to be honest, I think it actually looks great. This is the Gelid Liquid 360, so it is a 360mm all-in-one cooler. They do a 240 as well as a 120, and I could imagine that the performance just decreases the smaller you get, just like they do on all-in-one coolers. It will cost you around 110 to 120 pounds, which is about average for a 360mm cooler nowadays. But like air coolers, there is big competition in that space. There are a lot of brands out there producing these for very cheap, and there's also brands out there that are charging phenomenal kinds of prices. So this kind of sits roughly in the middle, and I'm hoping the performance does too. Opening up the box, we can see that we're pretty standard here. We've got a bit of padding. We've got the all-in-one cooler system itself here with the water block and pump and the radiator system. We have 3 fans here, and we have all the brackets that we need to be able to fit this, as well as an instruction set. The cooler itself is contained in these plastic bags. It's not as packaged as well as a lot of the other coolers out there, but it's packaged well enough. And to be honest, there is absolutely no damage on this. We've already had it inside a system, and it's pretty well kind of looked after. So we've done a pretty good job there. Taking a look at the cooler, it's pretty standard throughout. We have braided pipes here, so it looks nice in a system. I don't think there's many coolers nowadays that don't have the braided pipes, but you can get older versions of things that don't. They do look awful, so don't buy one of them. And then we've got the block here itself. The block does contain an infinity mirror with RGB lighting all the way around, as well as an LCD digital display of the temperature. The temperature of what though? I really don't know. To be honest, when I had this installed into the system, it did display a temperature, particularly when you put power to it, but it wasn't actually matching up with the testing that we were doing. So I'm not sure what the temperature is. Is it of the water inside the loop? If so, that probably made more sense. If it is of the CPU, it's very inaccurate. So I'm not 100% sure where the actual thermometer is in this and where it actually gets its temperature reading from, just like many of the others that we've looked at that do have that type of LCD in there. But I suppose it could be useful. If it is really high, then you'll know that there's something wrong with the system. When it comes to the fans in this system, you do get 3 of these. They're actually pretty nice fans. They're very sturdy. They're rock solid fans. They've got these nice rubber mounting in the corner. According to the back of them, they are the Gelid Liquid 360. They don't really have their own name, so they're not part of like a different set that they include. And they have pretty standard connections. You also do get an infinity mirror in the middle, as well as a RGB lighting all the way around, so it will match up with the block itself, and it looks pretty nice, to be honest. When it does come to those connections, I say they are standard. So we have a standard 3-pin ARGB connection, which means we can just hook it up to anything we want. And we also have a standard 4-pin PWM connection, so these fans are quite controllable and you can pretty much set them to any kind of speeds. I do believe that their minimum and maximum speed is around 600 RPM to about 1800. I think when we were doing our testing, we saw them max out at about 1780 kind of thing, but it's pretty decent and it provides a lot of airflow. Unlike the fans on their Gelid Black air cooler that we recently took a look at, these are much better quality. They're a lot quieter, and you don't really have any kind of issues with them, but they are a slightly different design. Obviously, we don't have the halo effect ARGB, but that's okay because I think these actually suit the block itself really nicely. I don't know if they actually do provide fans similar design to this, so matching them up might be a little bit of a pain, but because the design is so kind of generic really, I suppose you could just get them in another brand, minus the infinity mirror look. I'm not quite sure, maybe you can, and I'm sure you could actually blend it up pretty fine in a system. Along with the cooler itself and the 3 fans, which are all pretty decent quality, you get an assortment of accessories. We do have an instruction manual here. It is just a basic piece of paper, and it does go into detail of all the different ways that you're fitting it. This cooler itself does support up to pretty much any kind of socket that you can think of, all the way from AM2 all the way up to AM5. They have included that kit too, and all of your LGA 115X kind of series, and your 1200 and your 1700 as well. It's pretty versatile about which sockets you can actually fit things to, and the instructions do cover every single one of them. So at least the box and this kind of setup has been completely updated for the latest generations. Along with the instruction manual, we do get all the brackets needed to be able to fit it to any socket. We get a universal or generic backplate. This will fit pretty much all of those sockets, so you just use different pegs depending on whether you're going to Intel or AMD. We get an assortment of brackets here to actually mount the cooler down itself. These do screw to the water block, and then that actually mounts down onto some pegs, and they actually include this both for Intel and AMD as not the clippy system like you normally get on AMD ones. It is actually a screw down one. I actually really like them, so that really impressed me when I opened this. I think you can get much better kind of pressure and a much even pressure when installing it with that kind of system. Aside from that, you obviously do get lots of bags of screws. We have all the screws here needed to mount the fans and the radiator to the case. We get another bag here which is labeled AMD AM5, so they've included the AM5 pegs. I do believe that actually the difference here really is just in the length. They're slightly longer because of the depth of an AM5 CPU. We get some extra screws with washers. They're actually part of the universal kit. You'll use them whenever you fit any of the different sockets. We also get a bag here that says universal screw kit. Now this is generally what you use for your AM4, AM2, your LGA 115, your LGA 1200 and 1700. That will actually cover all of them. All they've done is included the extra bag for the AM5 because it's a lot newer. And then you get the LGA 20XX kind of screws here. So I'm not sure what is different about them. Maybe the lengths again are just slightly different, but they've included you for those slightly bigger sockets as well. Just like the last all-in-one cooler, which was actually from Antec, this one does also come with thermal paste as well as a little spatula. I do know that some people commented on the last video that we did with one of them where we pointed this out, that it's really nice to include this, that some people totally forgot about them and they went to actually go and buy some more. But if you are buying this cooler, you don't really need to worry about it because they provide you one in here. I actually like to keep them around. I've got a drawer full of them, and they're really useful when you want to get your thermal paste nice and flat and spread evenly over the CPU. It's really nice to see that they've included that because it is that slight extra that you don't tend to get with a lot of coolers. With the mounting gear aside, they do also provide you some extra little details here, and one of them I'm not exactly sure what it is. The first one that I will pull out is this. This is actually a PWM power splitter, so you can actually plug this into your motherboard and then split it off to 3 different fans. That's really useful because obviously not a lot of people have more than 1 or 2 kind of headers on the motherboard, so trying to power all of these fans at the same speed, this is actually going to be vital to do that. It's nice that they've included it because it means you just don't have to buy one yourself. And then we get an extra kind of SATA power connection here, which seems to go to a 3-pin ARGB. Now, what I'm assuming is that this can actually plug into like the cooler itself or the ARGB system on all the fans. The fans do come with a pigtail system, so you can connect them all together and connect them to the pump. And then I'm kind of assuming that this does connect to that and produce some kind of lighting. Now, the fact that there is no controller on this, I'm going to assume that there is something built into the pump itself that will actually just display some kind of lighting. Maybe it is just a standard ARGB rainbow effect. So for anybody that wants that, maybe this is useful to you, but for most of us, we'll want to be able to set the lighting systems and we'll want to plug it into a different thing. So either we need to buy a controller, which you can get pretty cheap nowadays. You can pick them up for £5 to £10 and you can get lots of different settings off them, or obviously you can plug it into your motherboard if you have an ARGB header and you can control it through software and pretty much do whatever you want. Now, it is nice that they included that if that's exactly what that does. It doesn't say anywhere on the packaging or in the manual, it doesn't even actually mention this cable, so I'm not 100% sure. Maybe I'll do some testing with it at some point, and if I do find out, I'm sure I will update the comments below. Now, in this video, we're not going to be showing you how to install this. That'll probably be for another time, but the instructions are pretty clear on what you need to do, so make sure you read them and follow them down to the T. We actually fit this into the system while the motherboard was still in the case, and it was pretty easy. It's pretty standard kind of instruction sets that all coolers kind of really come with. You're not going to really go wrong as long as you follow those instructions and make sure everything is kind of configured the way it needs to be for the type of socket you're doing. The one thing that you do need to remember is obviously to remove the little plastic off the bottom of the cooler. If you don't do that, you are going to run into thermal issues and you're going to have to kind of take it all apart again and reapply your thermal paste and reinstall it back on. So all in all, you do get everything you need into the kit. The packaging is very nice. The instructions are very clear. It gives you everything that you need to be able to get it up and running, including your splitters, maybe an AIO controller, we're not quite sure yet. And you can get everything running perfectly fine, and the system looks fantastic when it is in a case. I was quite impressed with the lighting effects of the fans, the mirror or the infinity mirroring of the centers of them, as well as the water block itself. It does give this nice unique kind of look to things. Even though we're not 100% sure what the temperature is actually telling us, it does actually look nice in a case, particularly when you're matching up the lighting of everything else. But of course, what's important is how it actually performs. We did some testing with our normal test suite, and we actually put it against a couple of other coolers that we've recently looked at, including the normal Noctua cooler that we actually have on the system, and we got some pretty interesting results. Using the Intel Core i7-12700K with a fan speed of 100 and an ambient temperature of 20 degrees, running against our normal 5 tests, when it's idle, the Gelid Liquid 360 managed to actually keep the CPU at around 22 degrees. That's just an increase of 2 degrees in the room, so that wasn't too bad, particularly with this CPU, which is a little bit of a hot runner. In gaming with Cyberpunk 2077, we got a max temperature of 46. Again, that's well within the tolerance, and you could game all day on that, so that was pretty good. In Unigen Heaven, which was the first synthetic benchmark that we ran, we managed to get a maximum of 40 degrees, so that was even better than the gaming score, and usually it is because the Unigen Heaven benchmark is quite old now and it doesn't really kind of test hardware that well, particularly when it comes to CPUs, but it was interesting to see what kind of result it would actually get there. When we started hitting the more demanding synthetic benchmarks, including Cinebench R23 single core, the Liquid 360 managed to keep the CPU at 50 degrees. That wasn't too bad. It's a nice score all round there. But then it did actually start to struggle when we started hitting the multi-core. Now the multi-core tests from Cinebench R23 are obviously a lot more demanding on the CPU, and it's going to be working a lot harder, and it clearly shows through the temperatures that we got. The maximum temperature we got with the Liquid 360 was 85 degrees. That's not great. A lot of people would kind of look at that and kind of wonder what's going on. But when we actually start to compare it to other things, it doesn't actually look that bad. When we compare it to the previous couple of coolers that we tested, including the Antec Vortex 360, another 360mm all-in-one cooler, and the Noctua NH-U12S with the dual fan configuration, we can see that in idle, the Liquid 360 managed to match the Noctua air cooler. That was all right to see, nothing really impressive there. When in gaming in Cyberpunk 2077, it actually performed slightly better than the Noctua, but a little bit worse than the Antec Vortex 360. I would actually say there was only a degree difference, so I would say that they kind of perform exactly the same there. In Unigen Heaven benchmark, it actually performed around 40. That was worse than both the Noctua cooler and the Antec Vortex 360. Although it is only 1 degree out from the Noctua cooler, so it's probably about the same there. It's roughly a similar kind of result to when running idle. In Cinebench R23 with a single core test, we can see that the Liquid 360 struggled here. They couldn't actually keep up with the other two coolers, getting a maximum of 50 degrees, whereas the Noctua managed to keep the CPU down at 44, and the Antec Vortex 360 managed to keep it down at 42. That's not so impressive, but if we actually move on to the multi-core testing, we can see that we get a very similar result here. The Liquid 360 managed to get a maximum of 85 degrees, very similar or close to the Noctua, and that's kind of been a trend that we've seen throughout here, whereas the Antec Vortex 360 managed to keep it down at 70. So what do those results actually tell us? What they tell us is that the Gelid Liquid 360 is on about par with a Noctua NH-12S with the dual fan configuration, which is an air cooler. So it's very similar to a dual fan air cooler system, which means the performance is actually okay. It's not the best performing cooler that there is out there, and it's probably not the cheapest. It's about an average price, and it's probably about average in terms of performance. coolers, but it all comes down to things like looks. Obviously a Noctua cooler, even with the additional fan kit that you can add onto them, or the one that we actually tested, are a lot cheaper than this. You can pick them up for about £60 included with the fan kit as well, I think, whereas obviously this one's about 110 to 120. You do pay more for your all-in-one coolers, as you would see with any kind of brand out there. How well does it perform against even more budget all-in-one coolers? I'm not quite sure. I've heard that things like the 360mm ones from Thermalright are actually pretty good, so it has got some tough competition here, but I think it kind of stands up on its own. Aside from performance, a lot of this actually comes down to what you want aesthetically. This is a very nice looking system, and it looks fantastic when it's inside a case. The LCD could be useful if we can figure out what it's actually reading the temperature of and telling us. I'm sure if we reached out to Gelid, they could probably update us, and if they do, and if we do that, I'll update the comments below so you guys can see. But that is our look at the Gelid Liquid 360. It's not as impressive as their air cooler, but it's a pretty decent setup. Let me know in the comments below if you would actually consider a cooler like this, or do you actually have one? Is it performing okay? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because we've got lots and lots of other things to have a look at, and I'm sure you guys won't want to miss that. And I'm sure, as always, we'll catch you guys in the next one.